at church did a series of sermons on Mythbusters. It was kind of funny. He started off with one that, God helps those who help themselves. 70-some% of Protestant thinks that's in the Bible. It's not. It's kind of interesting. And he went through several of those, and it was kind of interesting. I'd like to go through some Mythbusters this evening on what I call the myths of education. Myth number 1, and you'll have people running for office. I won't say anybody here that's running for office would say this. In fact, I'd say they wouldn't. But they will say something to the effect, if we just knew what it cost to educate our kids, we would fund it. You never heard that when you were in the legislature, I'm sure.
2 or 9.
And it's interesting, in the state of Kansas, they did a study, they paid big bucks for it. It was called Audigan, Blick, and Myers. And they came back with a number that it would cost to fund education and meet the standards and the direction and laws that are current in the state of Kansas and the federal government. And of course, the study showed that they needed to raise really a whole lot more money and send it to education to do the job we're supposed to do. The legislators were just aghast. Oh, it can't be right. It's wrong. Those out-of-town people, they just don't understand. And so the legislature said, we're going to have legislative post-audit look at this because they're Kansans and they would understand and they'll give us right information. So legislative post-audit looked at what it costs for public education in Kansas. Do you think it was more or less than Audigan, Blick, and Meyer? More. So myth 1, don't let anybody tell you we don't know what it costs to educate kids in Kansas. We know, we just don't want to pay for it. That's a difference. Myth 1. By the way, if we were getting the funds that's under current statute, Dodge City Public Schools, current statute, we would have $6 million more this year to educate kids in Dodge City. And you get that right, 6 with 6 zeros after it. Point 2, local effort under LOB. Our legislature chose not to fully fund the statute. Okay? They can have something in statute. I didn't believe that when I started this business, because if it was in statute, I thought they surely have to fund it. Boy, was I wrong. Ethel's laughing at me over here. She knows better. She's been in that Topeka crowd. She knows those people down there and how they are. If they had fully funded LOB equalization aid this year, we would have had to pay $2 million less in what we call local effort. Now, where do you suppose local effort comes from?
Property.
Hey, isn't it amazing how that worked? But they had to have the 7.5% ending balance they hadn't had for years, and they got it. But we're going to pay a little more locally. Myth 2, and this one I just love. You have people who say, if we would just spend more money in the classroom. That's the problem. We just don't spend money in the classroom. Have you ever heard that? Did you hear what the governor said here recently about, if we could just get this efficiency group and if we just put more money in the classroom, it'd be okay. All right. Next time a legislator says something to you like that, say, so you are in favor of not funding football. You're in favor of not funding basketball. You're in favor of not funding soccer. You're in favor of not having softball. You're in favor of not having extracurricular activities such as speech, theater, extemporaneous speaking, and all the other things that kids enjoy. And every educator that I know will tell you a kid in middle school or high school who's involved will be a better student, and we've even got the grades to prove it. We run the numbers at our district. We can prove it. But it's not money in the classroom, so it must be evil or wrong, right? Or maybe it's we're putting too much money, and you heard this one, in capital outlay in buildings. So let's say this is a classroom today. We're in a classroom. And we're only going to spend money in the classroom, right? Now if we put a roof on top of the classroom, that's not in the classroom, is it? Right? So if the roof starts leaking, spending money on the roof, that'd be a waste of money, wouldn't it? Because it's not in the classroom. Am I telling the truth now? And of course, as the leaks start and stuff gets wet and starts to smell, what do you think that does? It creates something called what? Mold. And if you have black mold, how many people do we need to send to the hospital because we didn't fix the roof? But again, you will have people saying, we need to spend more money in the classroom, and if you spend money on buildings and facilities, that's somehow wasteful. Folks, if you don't have a decent learning environment, how can our teachers do the job? Another myth. Third myth. I love this one. You know, when I went into education, it was kind of, you got some kudos once in a while that, you know, you're there for the kids, you're there for a good cause, and, you know, it's not like you're working for private industry, but you kind of felt you were contributing something. And anymore, what do we hear? We hear, my goodness, we've got too much administration. And it may be true. This month, my food service director, who happens to report to me, got a thing about this thick of new menus from the State Department that came from the Department of Agriculture from somebody in Washington, D.C. that were supposed to be implemented with the first of this year. And the whole thing on how you do that, of course, by that time we've already had to order food, set up menus, and do everything. And we're ready to start for second semester. We're ready to order our food for second semester. It was a book that thick. The rules and regulations that we have to meet on a daily basis, and the reports we have to do. And people say, you're not accountable in education. Peggy, are you accountable as a teacher anymore?
Oh,
yeah. You've been there and done it. And I see a couple of former board members back here. Didn't it just amaze you how many reports that went across that we did? We just completed the field work on our local audit today. We will have a state audit that comes in and looks at every student in the district. You know, folks, if they could take some of the reporting requirements off our backs, we might not need as many administrators. But it seems like every time they come up, it's another report, not one fewer. I think it's a myth that we have too much administration. I wish we could do with less, but I'd like to see somebody try and get it done right. By the way, I'm real proud of 443 and the people who work for me. We've had 2 years, we haven't even had a management letter with an audit, and we spend between 80 and 100 million a year. And that's pretty impressive. We do a pretty good job down there. I've got some great people. Myth number 4. What we really need to do for education is have local control. That sounds good, doesn't it? And we ought to raise the money locally. Now, Juan, how are you going to get money? What was that word, that P word? Property tax. You need to understand something. In some groups, I wouldn't even try to explain this, but you're all intelligent people here, and you'll catch this. There's a thing called assessed valuation per pupil. Okay? So it's not necessarily how much money you raise with a mill. It's how much money do you raise with the mill on a per pupil basis. You get what I'm trying to say? In other words, if every district across the state raised a mill, everybody doesn't get the same amount per pupil. If the richest district in Kansas raised 1 mill, what they would get per pupil, Dodge City would have to raise 17.4 mills. So let's do it locally. If you're a rich district, it works great, doesn't it? But if you're Dodge City, do you want to pay 17 times more than the richest district for the same amount per pupil? You see, really, state funding needs to be, paramount in this whole discussion. So I think it's a myth to talk about local funding meeting the needs. Now finally, and I think this is kind of where they're asking me to speak a little bit, and this is the final myth, and it's the cuts don't matter. Have you heard that? Money doesn't matter. Our teachers are all dedicated. They'd probably come to work whether we paid them or not, wouldn't it? I mean, it's just, that kind of thing. Today, our district, we had gotten down after the last lawsuit and the Supreme Court decision, we'd gotten our class size down to about 21 to 22 per class in elementary. And the people who are the education gurus, I'm not, I'm a bean counter. That education stuff, that's another department down the hall, they take care of that. But the people who do that stuff say we need, with our student mix of people who don't speak English when they come to us, when we don't have a lot of students whose parents have a college background in higher ed, a lot of our parents, let's be real honest, they may have made it through 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. Great people, hard workers. If you've ever been through one of these meat plants, folks, those people work tremendously hard, and I respect that. Right? but their kids need a little extra help. They're not dumb. No, they're smart, and they're intelligent, but it takes a little more time, a little more energy. We need teachers who have a little more time to do individual help and attention. We need paras to do those things. Our class size today in Dodge City on our lower grades will probably hit 25 to 26 this year. We don't have final numbers, but that's where we are. That's before any of the cuts that will come as a result of this tax policy by the current administration. If the tax policy goes through, we're going to see larger class size. We're going to see teacher wages frozen in spite of the inflation and so forth. And it's going to be harder and harder to recruit the people we need in the classrooms to serve your kids and your grandkids. Questions?